All right, we're going to get started. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Friday at TEA, virtually or in person. We are so excited that you're able to be here today, and we have a lot of great topics to dig in with you. So if we can go ahead and get started. Just as a reminder for some of the housekeeping is that this meeting is being recorded. It will be posted on the website, and as we normally do, we will also send you a link to that. Usually happens within 48 hours, depending on how quickly IT can get it up. Please leave your camera on if possible, and then please rename yourself in Zoom with your name and organization. One favor that we do have is that staff has got some great topics that they really want to dig in. So if we can wait until each of the presentation sections are over, staff is going to be very cognizant in allowing you to have some questions, follow up with some feedback. But if we can let them complete and then open that up, I think that will make sure that we all stay on track and we can get all the great work done. So what we're going to have on the agenda today is we're welcoming you now. Staff is going to be talking about EPPs and reading academies. I know this is something that has been brought up in the past, so we're going to have a great discussion there. Teacher residency discussion, the EPF development updates, SBEC's December TPA options discussion, and then again, we'll have any opportunity for member questions. There were no questions that were sent to us that we're going to have on the agenda today. Dr. Roselle did send one question in that Marilyn Cook was really quick on the fly with Judith to get him the answer to that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jessica, and I know she has a great show for you.
Thanks, Christy. Good morning, everyone. Good to see everyone today. I'm excited for us. The first topic on our agenda today is to talk about educator preparation programs and the reading academies. This is actually a topic that we've brought before this group in the past to talk about opportunities to think about connections between the science of teaching reading exams and what is ultimately assessed on that assessment and what's integrated into the reading academies. And then in previous discussions, we've touched on the topic of potential opportunities for ed prep programs to also engage more explicitly in reading academies administration. And so with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague, Ebony Love, who I think some of you might have had the chance to work with in the past, but she's taking on some additional roles here within the agency, and give her a chance to introduce herself, as well as some of our team members from our Reading Academies TEA team that have also graced us with joining our call today.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Ebony Love. I serve as the Director of EPP Continuous Improvement. It just means I'm a little biased and have the best job here at the agency, and I really get to help support EPPs as we continue to improve our practices, as we build resources, and really just continue to build competency around preparation for both teachers and administrators. All right. So I have the honor and privilege to talk to you a little bit today about reading academies. Again, this is more so for informational, just about what is reading academies and kind of framing up the conversation that's been happening in the field. But to start with, hopefully all of you are familiar with the science of teaching and reading. And so really, this is about understanding the research that can help teachers deliver this high quality evidence-based instruction that supports literacy in all areas. So just as a reminder, the STR is not a specific curriculum intervention, and it's not only just research on phonics and instruction, but it is that body of research that's going to help provide that deeper understanding of how children learn to read, specifically the skills that are involved in the parts of the brain that are responsible for the reading development. So when we're looking at reading academies is in partnership with the science of teaching and reading. So the requirement that came from the 86th Texas legislative session with the passage of House Bill 3 really is looking at the science of teaching and reading certification. And this is where the teacher candidates are receiving training on the STR competencies during their ed prep program. When we're looking at the teaching academies, really, this is about learning how to support that. So I want to make it clear that the Reading Academies is not a replacement for the STR, but they're working together in partnership with one another. But specifically, we have received some feedback from the field that indicates the desire really to offer reading academies before teachers and administrators enter that first year. And so in order to do this, there's a couple of pathway options. There you go, Jessica, for the EPP pathways. And so I wanted just to take a second to explore the way that these could work at the EPP level. That first pathway being the ELAR pathway, where the participants are led by the English cohort leader, and it's approximately 60 hours. There's also an option for that biliteracy pathway. And this is where we're looking at bilingual or dual language programs. So both the Spanish language arts as well as our typical reading as well. There's an administrative pathway that is slightly shortened, and this is because it's going to assume that these teachers have already taken, for the administrative pathway, it's a shortened course because it contains less details about the literacy content information, but it really focuses on the administrative lens for school and district leaders that are making those decisions. And then finally, there's also an STR pathway that is shortened courses because it assumes that the teachers have already taken and passed the STR exam. And so this offers a little bit more information about the STR competencies being optional. But again, I want to note that the STR pathway is only available for those participants that have already completed the STR because Reading Academies is not a replacement for that STR component.
And just to make a plug there, that was a discussion that this group had, I think, close to a year ago now, where we talked about, based upon problems of practice that you all had named in this space, were there opportunities for us to think strategically around what was assessed in STR and potentially streamline some components of the Reading Academy. So I've been really excited that that pathway has had the opportunity to roll out over the course of the past year, and we've seen educators leverage that pathway. Holly, if you wouldn't mind. Oh, thanks. And so I think as we think about moving forward and talk about opportunities for EPPs to be potential providers of Reading Academies, really thinking about the current Reading Academy structures and what that could mean for ed prep programs in the future.
Okay, so there's two different delivery models for for Reading Academies currently. The first one is looking at the comprehensive model, and this is in-person learning. This is the opportunity for learners to attend an in-person session where they're going to be engaging with the content in smaller size groups, typically between 30 and 60 participants. And this also includes classroom coaching sessions. And this is going to take place where they apply the Reading Academies to the lessons within the classroom. So again, this is that in-person component, really hands-on with the students and with the teacher candidates. The second option is going into the blended model where it is virtual learning. This one you can hold slightly more participants, between 50 to 100 participants in totals. But here, all of the artifacts are handled virtually by a virtual cohort leader. There is the opportunity for continued support, but in this model, what you see is more of walking through the modules and then submitting different documents and artifacts. But again, this is not being completed in person. That's an optional portion there. So our big goal of presenting the Reading Academy's information really is just to be able to offer an optional pathway for EPPs to be approved as an authorized provider of Reading Academies. This would look specifically as an opt-in because there's been feedback from the field that there's really a push to challenge to do the Reading Academies within the first year. But what would it look like if we were able to prepare teachers prior to their first year of learning to be able to engage in this Reading Academy work? There's continued interest from EPP groups in doing this work, particularly when building those strong partnerships with LEAs, again, better preparing or having teachers ready to go that day one of their novice year. And I want to point out, although this is an optional pathway for EPPs, there's still an application process that would happen in order to become an authorized provider for Reading Academies. That has a specific set of criteria in order to be approved there. So a couple of timeline considerations here. First would be spring 2023, which is what we're in now, and really trying to build that stakeholder engagement and create a pilot recruitment. We know that it is important for us to not only speak with our EPPs, but also other LEAs and other stakeholders as we start to plan out what this potentially could look like for EPPs to be authorized providers of reading academies. The hope is that in this summer, we would be able to engage with different EPPs in a Reading Academies pilot. And this is working with a small group of about 3 to 6 EPPs just to see what this would look like, hopefully mitigate any factors or barriers, and really be able to learn what this would look like as having EPPs as those authorized providers. With the ultimate goal of the 2024-2025 school year being able to have a cohort of EPPs approved to offer the Reading Academies as well. And so we have a couple of questions that we want to pose to the group, but before I get to the questions, Jessica, is there any information or clarification you would like to add?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, Emily. I think there's, again, we've heard from a number of stakeholders around the interest in EPPs being able to be authorized providers of the reading academies. And so again, really wanting to engage this group, knowing that you all have such a variety of perspectives to really start to discuss what this pathway can look and sound like. Because I think when we say EPPs being authorized providers of the reading academies, I think there's a number of decision points and an opportunity to really craft this in the way that it's meaningful for our candidates who are going through prep programs. And so I think in particular, we've been thinking about in these questions down below, given the structure of preparation programs and the requirements related to educator preparation, are there any things that we should be taking into consideration when building out these the Reading Academies EPP pathway? So thinking about things like a coursework integration, when this would happen over the course of the educator preparation program. Is it in addition to coursework and content, or is there opportunities to integrate? Again, this is very early days, but we know that you all know your work the best. And so are there opportunities to highlight potential pain points, things that we should be taking into consideration? Again, that our hope is to dig in further with you all in partnership, as well as other prep programs, to think about ultimately what the design of this pathway could look and sound like. So I guess I think I sort of previewed there, Ebony, the questions. So are there things that we should be taking into consideration from y'all's experiences? And then also knowing that we have such a diversity of types of programs in the state, is there anything we should be thinking about in terms of differentiation based upon program types, or just sort of initial wonderings we have? I would also make a plug. We have Donna Lund and Wando Clyburn here from our TEA Reading Academies team. So I just want to say a big thank you to them for joining. So they're excited to hear the input that you all have as well. And then they're also here if there's any other questions that you all have. But I'll open it up to the group to see if there's any initial wonderings, questions, takeaways related to our discussion questions. Hey, Gina. Question on your end? Morning.
Good morning. I just have a quick question. So many of us are approved providers for continuing professional ed through TEA. Do you see this as something that would be the authority to offer the Reading Academy at EPPs? Do you see this as something that would be evidenced through program curriculum and instructor expertise, or do you see this as kind of like the T-TEST trainer of trainers model, where there's select faculty who get trained and then they provide this, kind of through either a continuing professional ed model, or I'm just kind of thinking out loud.
Those are great questions, Gina. I'll say I can share a little bit around. So we have sort of like standard application processes for authorization of entities to be providers of the Reading Academy. So it would be separate from sort of our continuing professional education processes. I don't know if either Wando or Donna from our Reading Academy teams, if you all had just like a the quick overview of what kind of that authorization process currently looks like for Ed Prep program for, I'm sorry, for any entity that wants to be offer the reading academies. Again, knowing, that there's some things we might take into consideration for Ed Prep, but just in general, maybe what that process looks like.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So for authorized providers, it is a multi-step process that is done by the Office of School Programs leadership to see if you're able to have a certain number of cohorts within your authorized providers network. And so that would be that application process, evaluation, and then approval. And as we continue to have some of these meetings, we'll go more into depth on what that could look like for EPPs.
But I would say, at the high level, to one of those reinforcement there, that there would be sort of a separate vetting evaluation process of folks, but that we would be clear on what those, if there were any EPP specific, standards or requirements that might be different from just sort of the overall authorizing process, given the structure of Ed Prep. Awesome.
There's a really good question in the chat about the target audience for the EPP-led reading academies. And so I believe the goal, the target audience for the EPP-led would be the undergrads or those that are working on their initial certification. Currently, there are systems in place for current teachers and other authorized providers that they are going through. There's a big bulk of teachers that were trained this year. And again, if anybody from the Reading Academies team wants to jump on to help clarify, or Jessica, but this would primarily be for those that are seeking certification.
Ebony, that's spot on. I think one area that we would want to continue to discuss with EPP stakeholders is knowing that we've got both our traditional and alternative routes to certification. And so one, I think, kind of question to discuss with stakeholders and to understand is sort of what are the benefits and or barriers in either pursuing this as a, at what point within the educator preparation program would we expect for the reading academies to be facilitated, particularly in our alternative certification program? So that's something that we would want to dig in more alongside, again, all types of programs to understand, are there some of those differentiated considerations kind of, or across the board considerations on when we would require that the reading academies happen over the course of a candidate's preparation. Kevin, question that you had?
Yeah, I mean, then just building off what you're saying, Jessica, it makes me wonder, like, what are the cost and access pieces that affect our candidates? So, like, is it built into the curriculum of the EPP? Is it a standalone cost? Then if it's a standalone cost, can one participant in another EPP that maybe doesn't offer it, can they then go to EPP number 2 and do that? Would we allow EPPs to have it where they could not, they would ban other EPPs candidates? So those kinds of things about money and access are the big questions that I have.
No, I really appreciate you raising those, Kevin. I think that those are things for us to definitely keep in the forefront as we're talking through some of the structures here, to ensuring that if we're going to if this will be optional for EPPs to offer reading academies, I think we need to make sure that we're talking more explicitly around access for our pre-service candidates to ultimately engage in reading academies, particularly as they go into hiring markets, et cetera. So appreciate that push there. Christina, additional questions or thoughts you had?
Yes, I just honest and clarification on and an additional question. If EPPs were given the ability to be authorized providers, would they also still have the 2 options of in-person or online? And then to add to that, if they chose the in-person one, could the coaching that goes along with that be embedded into the program instead of it becoming extra coaching?
Those are great questions, Christina. And I think things for us to also be keeping in mind is thinking about the kind of integration of the coursework or content and the integration of the coaching supports, I think are all areas we'd love to kind of dig in with stakeholders and understand what are the benefits and or barriers of that, right? So there are certain, so I'll give an example of coaching requirements. So currently within the Reading Academies, your cohort leader who has expertise in the science of teaching reading is the one who's conducting those coaching practices and observations. I know that in Ed Prep, right, the requirements for field supervision, your field supervisor might not have that science of reading expertise that would be required in the Reading Academies. And so those are it's, I think, a prime example of potential problems of practice, for lack of a better word, that we'd love to kind of sit down alongside prep programs and kind of think through where can we calibrate to ensure that we're holding this high bar for Reading Academies that we see as kind of a gold standard across the state, but also ensuring that we're not creating such parameters that it's impossible for any Ed Prep program to actually be able to do it.
Awesome. And then my last thing was, I will say, I think that it would be great for the EPPs to be able to have that ability, just because of there's not a lot of well, I'll speak from our stance. There doesn't seem to be a lot of communication around when they're going to be held with the EPP. And sometimes we have conflicting like schedules, or like we'll have a coursework scheduled and then they'll be like, oh, well, I have the Reading Academy this day. So if we were able to actually have that ability to plan it, I also think that if we do it before they're actually the first year teacher of record, it would, and this is for residency where they're like the residency year and then the first year, I think it would also help them, because right now it seems like our teachers are having to do it at the same time they're the first year teacher of record and they're still taking coursework, and it just becomes a lot for them. So if it could be before that, I think that would also be, it would allow them to engage more, I think.
I appreciate that feedback, Christina. I think that's feedback that our Reading Academies team has received around kind of the volume of expectations that are on our first year teachers' shoulders, and if there were opportunities to think about offering this content during pre-service practice, would that allow for more streamlined implementation in first year as teacher of record? Other places that kind of are immediately coming to mind for folks, I think I've got notes here around kind of enrollment and access questions of cost, questions around a delivery model. Are we thinking about this as an online versus in person, and that kind of questions related to integration into coursework and coaching practices, and then kind of when we would offer it, are all things that I'm hearing folks raising here. I'm just doing a quick scan through the questions. I think we've touched on most of them. Carrie, other things that you would raise for us to keep in consideration here?
Yeah, and I'm just sort of talking like things that come to my mind initially without a ton of time to think more deeply on this. So I apologize if it's, I'm not thinking correctly, but things that are coming to my mind initially are, you said in person versus online. And I think that there needs to at least always be a component of in-person learning. I think that it's just more valuable, and to just, to throw a teacher or a pre-service teacher online all the time is just going to, in a lot of instances, devalue the learning. And then thinking about transition, if it were just something that were just started at the EPP level, but then finished in the first year of teaching or second year of teaching, I would like, as we're considering potentially changing some of the recommendations coming out of the teacher vacancy task force regarding mentorship, as we're thinking about defining and sort of qualifying what quality mentorship looks like, I think that there would be benefit to an overlap of having some supports, induction supports in the sort of coaching frame in the Reading Academy modules.
That's super helpful for us to think about, Carrie, kind of think about like, is it one or the other, or are there opportunities to maybe think about some of those like bridging or baton passes between pre-service and in-service with mentorship?
Right. And I mean, as we're looking to work and partner with EPPs on mentor provisions and trainings, loop in some of these required trainings that educators are doing, especially since we're going to overlap the Reading Academies, hopefully between EPPs. I just think that having space for a coach to transition or a mentor support to transition in this really critical learning would be valuable, as we're in a space anyway to reconsider some of these models.
No, absolutely. Appreciate that push. Millie, I see your question in the chat around who gets to train to be trainers for the reading academies. There are certain qualifications in kind of the authorization or approval process to become a cohort leader for the reading academies, kind of application process. And so those folks are vetted by staff and approved, but I don't know, Wanda or Donna here, I might be speaking out of turn, or if there's any additional clarification you would add around who gets to offer the reading academies as those cohort leaders.
Thanks, Jessica. Yes, for cohort leaders, they go through a pretty extensive screener that focuses on lots of literacy-based foundational skills. And then from that point, they are hired by an authorized provider to support and facilitate the course, either that in-person comprehensive model or the blended virtual model.
Thank you. Meredith Lee, questions or thoughts that you had?
Yeah, I just had a question around like the year-over-year approval to either stay an authorized provider, or if once you become an authorized provider, do you just keep that status in perpetuity? And I'm really getting at like kind of how onerous is it to like kind of maintain this status over time?
I wonder, Wanda or Donna, if you wanted to address that one kind of around like the thoughts on authorization and ongoing authorization.
Sure thing. So for authorized providers, there are some certain criteria that we are looking at and evaluating as far as the implementation of the program, how people are doing, the number of participants that are able to complete. So kind of around those metrics. So those things are monitored on a consistent basis with formative and summative metrics. A whole lot of weight is on that summative. So that is an ongoing process that we do share with authorized providers throughout the year. However, you do get that support from the Reading Academies team.
Thank you. Holly, thoughts or questions that you had in thinking about this potential pathway?
Hello. Yeah, I guess, and I apologize if this was already discussed, but one of my questions is, would there be consideration to having a third model rather than the blended and the comprehensive to fit the unique situation of educator prep providers, kind of doing a simultaneous preparation for teaching in general and then reading academies?
I think that's a good push, Holly. I think that's been, I think some of the big wonderings are, you know, we've got sort of the structured approaches that we currently offer for reading academies, but again, recognizing that when we think about integrating this into ed prep, there's going to be some pain points. There's going to be some places where this is like works or doesn't work. And so I think that's our goal, is to kind of sit down. This is sort of our like coming attraction to, I would say, sort of like a broader set of stakeholder engagement to kind of really understand, for our traditional programs, for our alternative programs, you know, maintaining fidelity to reading academies implementation, but where are there those places where we need to maybe think a little bit differently in terms of some of the structures given the parameters of ed prep. So I think that's really going to be our kind of like big goal over the course of this spring stakeholder engagement, is understanding those structures, because frankly, I'll be transparent and vulnerable and say I'm not quite sure yet. I think we need to learn from the real experts to understand what this could really look and sound like. Christina, other questions or thoughts on your end?
I would, again, kind of going back to the question around the approval year to year, but focusing more when thinking about like long-term costs to the EPP. How much, I guess is my first question, like roughly, does it cost to have someone become a trainer of trainers? And then is that something that once they're trained, they're good to go? Or does it kind of work like CPI, where every so many years you have to get recertified?
That's a great question. I'll say Wando or Donna, I don't know if you all want to provide. I know that I'll say that I know that the cost models vary depending upon the type of authorization that the provider has, but I don't know if Wando, if you want to give some.
No, that's true, Jessica. So the cost model definitely varies. So at our next meeting, we'll be able to share a little bit more details with that. But as far as ongoing certification, once you have become a cohort leader, then the next part to keep that up to date is going to the yearly recertification training, just to stay up to date with any of the changes that are happening with the Reading Academy program.
Awesome. And then I guess my last to kind of go with that so for instance, if I became a trainer of trainers, right, I could then train my coaches who could then become like cohort leader. I just want to make sure I'm like tracking this train to tell you the truth. So if like TEA trained me to train other people, then would it cost money? I think that's for me to then train my coaches on my team at my EPP as well, or would it just be like once we've paid for me to be trained, like we're done with the upfront cost? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get you on that. Well, it's really each person who would serve as a cohort leader would have to go through that screener process, and then they would independently go through the training. So not really more of a trainer model, but they're getting that direct training from TEA. And once they have gone through that initial screening process, every year they would just get those updates.
Okay, thank you. I was confused by that. Thank you.
Oh, no worries. You're most welcome.
And Christine, I think, we'll be able to bring to other conversations subsequently some additional kind of, I'd say like straw man, like thoughts on structures for folks to react to and give feedback on. And so here we just wanted to kind of get some initial sense on if folks in this call were going to say like, whoa, we don't think that's a good idea, or like generally things that automatically come to y'all's mind as you're thinking through what this would look and sound like. So y'all are raising a number of super helpful questions for us to collaborate with stakeholders on as we move forward. Kelsey, would you mind, I don't know if you're able to come off of a mute and share a little bit more around the question that you put in the chat. I just want to make sure I understand the ask here.
Oh, yes. I mean, I know we're kind of jumping ahead to some of the logistical things, but, like, just to say, like, when is a teacher, given their, I mean, I know Senate Bill 1267 made some modifications as to what must be available in the reading academies and at what grade levels. So I just, maybe just pause to have a point of clarity on who has to take them and when, not just when there might be an option of offering this as an EPP, but when are teachers actually obligated to complete this?
Yeah, I Wando or Donna, do you want to take on the Reading Academy side what the current statute requires?
Absolutely. So for House Bill 3, once they are that teacher of record in that K-3 classroom, that is when they are required to take it, or if they are a campus principal of a K-3 campus. So once that happens, they need to be enrolled to complete the Reading Academies within that first year of employment. But we would like to see through this program if we would be able to offer that to those. And Jessica, I'll defer to you for the part that connects directly to EPPs.
Yep. So I think the goal here is, Kelsey, is to be able to offer this before the teachers, even the teacher of record. So they've already met that statutory requirement when they're employed. Again, with that caveat around having a discussion with stakeholders around alternative certification and kind of when that might be offered in that pathway. And then I think, was your question just around, I don't want to, just to name here that the other part of House Bill 3 related to the science of teaching reading exam, that component is required for educators in EC through 6th grade. So there's a little bit of that different requirement on the part of reading academies versus STR exam.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Awesome. I think I saw, I think maybe if we take Carrie and Donna, and then maybe if and I'm just keeping an eye on the agenda and talk.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go super fast. I'm just piggybacking on Kelsey's question, and the answer but completion isn't statutorily required within the first year. It's isn't it by rule? It's like within 18 months, or is it guidance? Or I mean, statutorily it's not, because there's these different start entry points for reading academies. And so I know that there's some, it could be by the end of the second year. It's not in statute, right? Like, it's not like a teacher it loses their job in that K-3 position if they haven't completed the reading academies by August of their first year of hire, correct?
Yeah, they just need to at least be enrolled within that.
Okay, that's what yeah.
Yes, they need to be enrolled within that first year because the program is 11 months. And so, for example, now a teacher who started in August might start their course in January, but they will not finish until close to next January. So they just need to be able to be enrolled. And if they're not able to complete that next year, they should not be placed in a K-3 classroom.
If they're not enrolled.
Right. So they need to at least be enrolled and be in progress within the course.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Donna, additional thoughts or considerations you had?
Yes, I'm just wondering if you are the trained cohort model or trained cohort leader, are you able to offer all the paths? So the SDR path, the principal path, so you can offer all of the options. You don't have to have a separate person for each path.
Yes, that is true. You can offer all the pathways except for the biliteracy one. So if you have an ELAR cohort leader, they can offer ELAR, STR, in-person, virtual. But for biliteracy, that one is specialized. So you would need a biliteracy cohort leader for that one.
Could the biliteracy cohort leader offer the others or only the biliteracy?
Oh, absolutely. They can offer all. Great question.
Thanks, Donna. All right, and I think, Holly, if we give you the final question, and then I think we might shift topics.
Great, I appreciate it. Just real quick, what are TEA's plans for extending the reading academies to additional grades, say 4th and 5th grade? And I've also seen some information, I think it was in the budget bills that were filed, about an intent to try to expand it to all teachers, or in all grades. So I was just wondering what TEA's plans are about that.
Well, thank you for that question. There haven't been any updates as of yet, but any updates we'll definitely be able to share it to the field once those things are finalized.
So there's no plans in place right now to extend it to 4th and 5th grade?
Not at this current time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Awesome. Well, we really appreciate everyone's engagement on this topic. I would say, again, as Ebony and I indicated, this is a little bit of a coming attraction. We intend to keep this as a topic, hopefully in our next EPSG conversation, and then we'll be reaching out to folks on this call who are representatives of ed prep professional organizations. We'd love to have opportunities to get to meet with some of your membership to kind of talk through some of the parameters and potential considerations and get some feedback and really to just kind of sit down together and thought partner around this opportunity and what it should look and sound like given potential considerations in ed prep. So again, really excited to be able to kind of continue to lean on this together. And again, a big thank you to Donna and Wando. I know they're going to have to jump off in a second, but really appreciate them being here and being able to answer and address questions alongside us. So we're really excited to be able to get to continue to partner with them as well. Awesome. With that, I am going to pivot us to the next topic on the agenda, which is around teacher residency certification. Just as by way of framing, and this was a discussion with the SBEC at their across the summer work sessions in the context of a discussion around teacher performance assessments, but really intend moving into the February SBEC meeting to have a broader discussion with the board around an opportunity to create a teacher residency certification pathway. And so with that, I recognize that some of you on this call are very deep in the work of teacher residencies, and for others, this might be a very new concept. And so I invited my team to share today a little bit more around some of the context around teacher residencies in Texas and give a little bit of a preview of what will be discussed with the SBEC at their February meeting. Again, this is another a topic where I would name that that this is still in early days of development here, and that this would be another preview for opportunities where we look forward to continued collaboration and thought partnership with the field as we build further parameters around this potential pathway, given the board's feedback. So that I'm going to turn it over to Melissa and Beth to introduce themselves and share a little bit more.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everyone. I know a lot of folks on this call, so good to see you again, but I have not yet really been in this space, but I'm Melissa Yoder, and I'm the Director of Quality Preparation and Staffing. So excited to be here today and talk to you about teacher residency and just share a little bit, like Jessica said, about the background and all of the great work that's been happening in the state. I always say I have the best job because I get to work with incredibly innovative and hardworking people in our LEAs and ed prep programs and all the partners who support those folks. So really excited to talk to y'all today. Thanks, Jessica. So just to contextualize the role of teacher residencies within our theory of action around improving teacher preparation and this idea that it requires a system of aligned accountability policies and supports, teacher residencies really center in this support area in that fourth quadrant around recognizing and expanding those strong preparation practices. And they really are a key practice that really supports teacher development. Let's start with the definition though, right? What are we talking about? Let's level set here. So we have defined a teacher residency as a paid full year clinical training and co-teaching experience in a K-12 classroom where the resident is paired with an highly effective and experienced mentor teacher. And during that time, that mentor teacher is actively co-teaching with the teacher resident, providing coaching, observation, and feedback support along the way to really support that candidate's development. In a teacher residency model, EPPs and LEAs also have shared ownership over the preparation, support, and success of the teacher candidate. And that looks like co-planning and review of candidate performance data and hand-in-hand partnership throughout the entire development of those teacher candidates. And then it can take place at traditional, alternative, and post-bac certification routes. Beth's going to get to this a little more in a few slides, but we already have a vetted list of 28 programs in Texas who, and we'll explain the intent behind that in a second, but who span across traditional undergraduate pathways, who are post-bac master's programs, and also alternative certification programs. And we have those folks on the call today as well. So super exciting. And why do we care about residencies? Well, there's a body of evidence that continues to grow that teacher residencies impact retention and student outcomes, which student outcomes being our bottom line for everything we do, why we exist, right? So when it comes to retention, there's strong evidence that teachers prepared in teacher residency programs have higher retention rates over time. General national evidence points to that generally ranging from 80 to 90% in the same district over 3 years and 70 to 80% over 5 years. There's also I can keep narrating a little bit, Jess.
Sorry, y'all. When you have too many PowerPoint presentations open at the same time and your PowerPoint crashes. So
I think I have it up, Jess,
right now. Oh, thanks.
I think I have it up. I can pull it forward. But we also have super exciting some local evidence as well. A report was produced, a study was across 5 years from UH, shows that 9 out of 10 of those graduates remained in classrooms after the 3rd year, which is 11% higher than candidates prepared in our state average. So that's really exciting. Hold on, I'm a terrible multitasker, y'all.
I've got it, Melissa.
You got it. Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
And then additionally, there's evidence that points to residents supporting in those high needs placement areas, which we also know has been a topic of conversation amongst our task force, et cetera, across the board. National data shows that 30% of teacher residents taught English language learners or students with special needs. And we know those are huge priority areas. And then there's it's also signaled that some of those fields, such as math, science, and technology, have also been supported with teacher residencies. And then finally, impact on student outcomes. I know we have Texas Tech on the line here today, but there was a recent study from Texas Tech that showed that students from both their Tech Teach and Tech Teach across Texas, I'm going to get those garbled, both wonderful programs, but both those residency programs showed some really strong outcomes, showing stronger reading scores, and it was statistically significant as compared to other preparation pathways for those teacher candidates. It really pointing to the efficacy of those teacher residents once they became those novice and beginning teachers. It also showed that the rate in which those teachers prepared in those teacher residency programs grew over time within their second and third year was stronger than teachers prepared in other pathways. So huge celebrations here, and it's so exciting to have this data that's based in several of our Texas programs as well. So with that, I just want to bring us to like our overall goal here around developing those high quality sustainable teacher residencies that really ensure a high quality, diverse teaching workforce that is well prepared to meet the needs of our Texas students. And in that, we really believe it's important to support districts and EPPs in partnership to strengthen the recruitment and selection of high quality, diverse teacher candidates. So having those shared recruitment and selection practices and that strategic planning around recruitment, ensuring a high quality clinical teaching experience, which we just talked about through that teacher residency model. And in that experience, use of competencies and aligned performance gates, right? That not only inform the design of that program, but support the partnership to make those real-time decisions about candidate support, and really determine the candidate's readiness to be in front of students in day one. And then we'll get to this in a second, but being able to, in partnership, also make decisions about reallocation and reinvestment of funding to support those sustainable resident wages. And we'll talk about the early body of work around sustainable models. So speaking of sustainability, so before I talk about the T-Class Decision 5 Residency Support Grant, which really has catalyzed paid residencies in Texas and the growth of them at a very fast rate, I do want to name that this grant and this work was built on the foundation of early pilots and proof points across the state from really brave and innovative programs and district partners who were doing this work very early. So I did want to shout that out because I know we have folks on the call too who were involved in some of that early work ahead of even this huge expansion of this that has happened in T-Class Decision 5's Residency Support Grant. But the goal of this grant was to bring partnerships, EPPs and LEAs together to implement paid teacher residency models, but to also be able to sustainably fund those paid teacher residency models beyond the life of any grant through implementation of strategic staffing models. In the grant, partnerships were provided with technical assistance from and are being provided with, it's not past tense, it's currently happening, technical assistance from our education service centers to be able to design these strategic staffing models that would allow for sustainably funded teacher residencies. The last thing we wanted to happen was for us to provide a grant that gave districts and their residency partners funding, but didn't provide them with the supports to make this sustainable beyond the life of that grant. So just to emphasize here, like our whole goal centered around prioritization of those partnerships and the sustainability of those paid teacher residency models. Some early outcomes, because the work is still happening, but just to provide a little information here, we currently have 28 vetted teacher residency programs who are supporting the work of our T-Class partners. One of the requirements of the grant was that those districts who were awarded did have a partnership with a vetted teacher residency program to ensure that they were partnering with a program that met that residency definition that we shared earlier. We began with just 15 and ended up scaling to 28, given the demand in the field, but also interest from programs in noting, I didn't realize this was happening the first time around. And so we feel very lucky to have this strong cohort of vetted programs already in the state who have been working to support our districts in this grant. We currently have 88 LEAs participating in the grant across 16 ESU regions in Texas. So that's huge and expansive. In 21-22, our districts paid 462 teacher residents. Given the timing of the grant, which was not the best timing, this was a huge success. And a huge shout out to our districts and EPPs who were able to make this happen, given that it launched right when residencies were beginning for the 21-22 school year. And then this year, we have placed and paid 795 teacher residents. So super exciting information. A couple things to note here, and we'll continue to talk about our vetted programs in a second, but what's really exciting is they're representative of all program types. I know I mentioned earlier, we have post-bac master's programs, we have traditional programs offering undergraduate and graduate pathways, as well as our ACP residency program. So really exciting, but also large programs, small programs, programs supporting across many regions, supporting our rural districts, our small districts, our large districts, our urban districts. So everyone, we have, the great thing about this grant has been just the cross section and the diversity across programs and districts who have participated. It's been a huge celebration. So I keep talking about sustainable residency models and staffing models, but just to provide a little more of a definition for this, when districts and EPPs began to participate in this grant, they agreed to engage in Texas Strategic Staffing Technical Assistance, where they partnered with a education service center who serves as their technical assistance provider. And in this partnership, the partner makes strategic staffing design decisions focused on staffing and scheduling, with the aim of driving immediate and long-term instructional, addressing those immediate and long-term instructional needs, as well as making decisions about how to reallocate and reinvest potentially underutilized and existing LEA dollars to fund talent. So here we have just an example of one model that some partnerships have selected, where a resident, in the days in which they are not co-teaching with their mentor teacher, they may serve, for example, one day as a substitute teacher to support some of those immediate instructional needs, but also it serves as a way to continue to develop that candidate, giving them exposure potentially to other grade levels, et cetera. So there are many models and many variations of models. And one of the keys of strategic staffing is that the partnerships come together to design very clear parameters about what those models will look like. It's that decision-making that is at the core of the success of this design. Technical assistance for this grant began in fall of 22. So all those 88 districts are currently, alongside their ed prep program partners, engaging in that design work. So again, huge shout out to all of those districts and their partners who have been going through an immense amount of work to really thoughtfully build these sustainable teacher residency models. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth Burkhardt, who will walk you through a little bit of background about the Texas Vetted Teacher Residency List.
Thanks, Melissa. Morning, everyone. It's been several years since I've been in this space. It's great to see some familiar faces. It's really good to be back with y'all. My name is Beth Burkhart. I am the Director of Teacher Apprenticeship at the agency, and I've kind of bopped around to different places in the agency, so you may have seen me someplace else before. So what we're looking at here is all of the programs on our vetted teacher residency list. So these programs have demonstrated a willingness to commit to a high bar for quality as they're partnering with us and the LEAs to transform their programs to offer a residency program. So this is no small amount of work, but these programs have really shown that they're ready to transform and commit to this, and they're seeing some really good results already. I know Melissa already spoke to this, but these 28 programs show a mix of traditional and alternative programs, urban, rural. In fact, 15 of the 20 ESCs in the state have at least one residency program within its boundaries. So these programs are expanding and serving the state. Really demonstrates that, you know, the ability to offer a high quality residency is not just accessible to one type of program. So there are many different ways to do this and many different programs that can do a teacher residency. On the left side, you can see the original 15 programs and then the 13 that were added in 2020, 22, 23. So I know what I've heard from programs, and it's great what they're saying. They're saying, you know, we want our teachers to be ready on day one, right? We hear that all the time. And they're also saying that their candidates who participate in a residency, they're not first-year teachers anymore. When they come out of the program, they are ready on day one, and it's kind of eliminated this idea of a first-year teacher. But I also, and not to put you all on the spot, but I know we have some programs here who are on this list. I would love to hear just some of your experiences working with the residency programs and your program transformation. So if I can pick on some of you a little bit. Maybe Becky.
Hi, good morning, Beth. How are you? Happy Friday, everyone, and happy to share about our experience with teacher residencies and really just to stamp working in partnership with our school districts and helping them respond to the needs and because they're responding to the students' needs has been really transformative to really help us work in tandem to respond to the students' needs and to be agile and responsive to what they need. In terms of the residency experience, our teachers love that they are seeing day one to day done, and also that they are able to experience the entire day, the entire school year, and it really elevates their teacher persona. Also helps manage their expectations of the work experience, which we hear a lot of feedback, and to really be a true partner to their mentor. So and we are also seeing that the mentor is growing as well in their understanding and how to build leadership and coaching. So we're really excited about this work and being able to also learn from the other colleagues that are on this list as we are walking the path together and to lean into the expertise in the state of Texas as we develop teacher residencies.
Thanks so much, Becky. Are there any other representatives from this list who'd like to speak about their experiences? Okay, insert joke about wait time. Last chance, though.
Beth, is this also an opportunity to ask questions to Becky and or other colleagues with residency programs, or is that going to happen a little bit later?
Ina, give me one more slide and we'll open up the floor to questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Otherwise, I'll lose my place and I'll never come back. Okay. So with all the great work that programs are doing, you know, we're still seeing some challenges, right? One thing is that we know what goes into a high quality program. We know that residencies are really effective, but right now there's no mechanism in SBEC to really define the essential components of a residency or to distinguish these candidates who participate in them. So on the next slide, we're going to talk through about how we're thinking about addressing these. And I know Jessica mentioned this earlier. This is early stages. This is exploratory. So this is us seeking stakeholder feedback. So keep that in mind. If it seems broad, that is intentional because we don't want to make any big moves without seeking a lot of feedback from the field. So what we're really doing is bringing together stakeholders to talk about what does a teacher residency certification path look like? We're looking at answering these big questions, like what are the must-haves for a residency program? So thinking about things like coursework requirements. What are the minimum of requirements around practice-based experience in terms of hours? What does the instructional setting look like? So is it all in one campus? Is it all in one class? Is it all with the same teacher? Or is there some other version of it that works? Support and mentoring. So speaking of cooperating teachers, who are the teachers? How are they being selected? How are they being supported and trained? Field supervisor requirements. Are there any big differences that go into this around training, support of a field supervisor? And then the co-teaching models that our programs are using. What does that look like in a rule about a certification pathway? Big question here is, how are we evaluating and assessing our residents' progress and their readiness to teach? What does this mean for their certification exams? What about those performance gates that are embedded through a residency program? What do those look like? How often do they happen? Observations, how many formal, how many informal? What are the time requirements on those? So all these questions we want to get answers to and input from the field. And finally, questions around governance. What does an effective partnership look like between the EPP and the LEA? So again, more questions about what's the makeup of this collaboration? Who is on this team? How often are they meeting? What kind of things are they discussing? Our next steps in this, so we've already discussed it briefly with SBEC. We're going to bring it out again for discussion in February. And we aim to come back to you with more details, more feedback, and more strict parameters around what this certification could look like. Now is an excellent time for questions and any other programs who want to speak up about their experiences.
You know,
is it okay for me to go ahead and
go for it?
All right. So Becky and anyone else who would like to respond, one area on this slide that I don't yet see is funding. So if T-class funding is expected to run out, that's a strategic staffing model kind of basically. And so I guess I have a lot of questions on this kind of funding issue, because we at TWU, and I know all of you, we have candidates who have either full-time jobs as full-time subs already, or full-time positions in other industries. I just had a candidate call me the other day who works full-time for a bank and is already worried about and she's a single mom, African-American, incredibly brilliant and articulate and committed and dedicated, and is already worried about how she's going to complete the clinical practice requirements in our program. And so, how do we compel school districts, other sources of funding agencies, to invest in this? I mean, I think the research and the buy-in, we all, agree this is just the best way to prepare teachers. But there's just a lot of challenges in that funding mechanism and how we compel and create, ways to pay for this model and to support our candidates who need more than just a stipend. They really kind of need a living wage with, insurance benefits and things like that. So I guess I'm just, asking Becky, how did you all navigate some of those challenges? And how many candidates in your program percentage or what have you actually is completing a residency?
Right. Gina, it's always good to see you. And I think the answer I think there's a lot of ways to win, and there's a lot of right answers. And please know I am not, I know on my Zoom squares I see an expert, Donna, right underneath me. And Krista, Dr. Sterling's here too. So please weigh in and build on anything that I may miss. But what I would say is that when we're working with our school partners, we're really at the table together. And when you're at the table together, it means showing your financial landscape and your financial picture to one another, and to be radically transparent about the kinds of investment that you can make in growing talent in your district. And on the EPP side, it's the investment that you make in your school districts that are in your community or in your sphere to influence. And I've seen a lot of really great partnerships and a lot of idea generation that's come out of how to make it sustainably funding to make it possible. And a lot of that work really resides around how the dollars can work differently to grow talent. And especially if we know that residents we're retaining, and that's the incredible work coming out. I think Melissa was sharing that with us, the incredible work coming out of Tech Teach and other programs around the state, that a resident is retained. And when a resident's retained, that means that the district isn't spending money on teacher turnover. So there's an expense there in the district that might not be there, right? If we were able to retain and keep the teachers and grow them in a way so they know exactly what it means to be a teacher. The second thing that I would say is really the districts, we're all walking in our why, which is for students, and we have classrooms that may not have a leader in them today. And so when we work with our school districts, they're very invested in the why, Gina, and the why is we need a leader for the classrooms and around the state. And so that investment, I think, is becoming more and more compelling as they're working with their EPPs across the state, and to figure out how we can do things differently so we can be better for kids. Because we know that paid clinical teaching routes attract talent. To your point, this brilliant young lady that you have the opportunity to work with needs a family sustaining wage. And I know there are tools, residency funding tools, family sustaining wage tools that many of the partnerships are using to sort of balance that conversation so that we can make good things happen for our students, for those that lead the students, for the EPPs, and for the school districts. So I'd be happy to talk offline. Don't want to say too much. I probably elaborated way more, Gina, than I should have, but I'd be happy to share or let someone else build.
No, thank you, Becky. Those are all great points that are well understood, and I appreciate that. And so I would love to talk to you. It sounds like you all have not really experienced some of the challenges, and it's working really smoothly. And just real quickly, how many candidates are you working with that are completing a residency, a percentage out of your program?
Yep, Gina, I can tell you how many district partners we have, and then each district partner has a goal of how many residents we need to place. And we're working hard to meet that goal, because some districts can afford a different amount of residents. But I will name in one particular district, we have 26 residents that are placed and currently contributing in that pathway to students learning today. And would also name, I think, Melissa, that there are residencies that happen both inside of T-class and outside of T-class that meet the definition. So this is an example. I can pull numbers for you.
Yeah, and I would just echo, Gina, that I think across our vetted teacher residency programs, we've got many that are fully scaled. Again, scaling residencies within the Ed Prep program is priority for many folks who are on that list. But again, a continued work in progress and in the spirit of continuous improvement. I'll say the other benefit is, again, with pretty significant statewide investment in the technical assistance apparatus to actually help LEAs and EPPs in the process of building more sustainable living wages for teacher residents, and then having 88 plus proof points in the field for us to learn from. all the various implementation challenges, because it's not always going to be smooth sailing. We know that to be true. I wouldn't want to speak for Becky, but I don't think it's been smooth sailing 100% of the time. And so, but this is actually about, collectively really rolling up our sleeves and working in partnership. So again, we've had the benefit of this piloting work, a lot of opportunities to gather lessons learned to ultimately help support the field even more in the future.
Jessica, that's exactly what I was
going
to say about the work that's happened so far. And one thing that I would note, one anecdote that came out, Gina, as you were asking your question, we had a district partner who came forward to one of our providers and said, "You have really pushed me to think differently about how I am structuring talent, how I'm funding and thinking about where my lines of money go into the future." So it is changing. It's a mindset shift, but these folks have been incredibly innovative and, like Jessica said, jumping over a lot of hurdles right along the way. But it's we're excited to continue to gather those proof points. Dr. Sterling.
I will say I think Christina's hand was up first. Just in the spirit of love.
Oh yes, yeah. Go ahead, Christina. Sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Sterling. I wanted to add on to something I shared in the chat from a teacher perspective. We've had residents in our district in the past, and I think in terms of this financial feasibility for residents, we also have to consider what happens after the residency, because residency does not provide a guarantee that a teacher is going to find placement. And to add on to what I shared in the chat, I think that if the goal is for teachers to have long-term placement, we need to have more checks and balances on the mentor and cooperating teachers, because the resident success largely depends on the capacity of their mentor cooperating teacher. And so, as someone who's been in this role before, I wonder why SBEC hasn't made more of a universal system to help train mentor and cooperating teachers so that they can serve in these various capacities, so that financially this is a great move for future residents, because they know they're going to get this exceptional training and support from their mentor cooperating teachers, because there has been a system set in place to help ensure that you're going to see the same quality of support from mentor teachers, regardless of what program it is or where you're at in the state. And I think that that's a very big factor in the ultimate success of residents or, teachers and EPPs in general. So I wanted to speak that, because I think that that's a really big part of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Christine, I really appreciate you naming that about the mentor teachers. And I think that there's a real opportunity here in the context of thinking about what could this residency pathway look and sound like, where there's an opportunity for the SBEC to put some real clear stakes in the ground around what are those parameters or requirements for cooperating or mentor teachers. And then I think there's also broader, opportunities to talk about, resources or supports that could be embedded in the field related to best practices in mentorship, best practices in co-teaching that our cooperating teachers engage with, are all things that we're also thinking about at the agency level too. Christina, additional thoughts on your end?
Yes, and actually, I'm glad I was so gracious and was like first, because it helps with what I was going to actually ask / curiosity about. So I will say, I think one thing that's happening for me right now is what we have been talking about as far as vocabulary. Like for our participants during their residency year, they have a host teacher. That's what we call them. And we call them a host teacher intentionally, because we are not intending for that teacher to actually be a mentor, quote unquote. We want them to be in the classroom with someone who has showed great leadership, but we are not actually putting the ask on that teacher to further develop as much as just to be a collaborator. And so I wonder about the difference there as far as when we're saying mentor teacher versus when like my org thinks of host teacher and things like that. I would want more clarity around that. I would also say something that has come up for us outside of the host teacher, I'm going to use host teacher just for my purposes, is campus culture. And I say that to say, I do think that it's even more important that when we have these programs on these campuses, the leadership of the campus has to have a level of training / buy-in as well, because, you know, what we're seeing a lot is we have these residents who want to be teachers, they're in it to win it, but they get to these campuses and they like the spirit is like beat out of them. And so I definitely think that with all of these things, that campus leadership needs to be a factor. And my last thought that I was thinking about as far as the residency model that came up with the cost, because the living wage piece is a big thing. And I wonder if something that could also be put in, you know, TEA has a bottom floor for full-time teachers as far as salary. You know, like with our program, our residents are basically hired like a TA in the district. And so they make TA wage, which I'm just going to throw that out there, not really a good wage either. And I was just curious if we honestly looked at it as if they're coming in as a resident teacher, we look at it more of a 0-year teacher on the TEA scale. If we look at it more like that, as opposed to, I don't know how other places are paying their residents, but that could also help with those people who have to be able to pay their bills while doing the residency program as well. So just some thoughts.
Oh, really appreciate those pushes, Christine. And I think that there's opportunities again as we kind of engage in further stakeholder discussions around like kind of like the parameters related to the residencies. I think having those discussions around cooperating or mentor teacher requirements or host teacher requirements, I think there's definitely going to need to be some calibration on language here. Are certainly conversations we're excited to have. I would say, I think just to name that, you know, in the context of our discussions as a group, we're often grounding our discussions in either practices that can take place within our current parameters and or discussions around recommendations to make to the SBEC around potential changes to rules. There are some factors that currently, you know, TEA and the SBEC don't have the ability to fully influence those actions that would potentially necessitate more legislative action. And so really for the purposes of our conversation, we've been trying to really think about, again, a good example is the strategic staffing supports, thinking about within current existing parameters, within current district budgets, are there ways to fund those roles? But again, I know that in other spaces, there have been conversations around the broader statutory changes as well. I did want to reinforce, I think there was also a common trend in the chat around kind of working conditions and supports and campus culture that kind of enables the environment for the candidate, as you named, Christina, and then also how that supports the mentor and cooperating teacher as well. And just want to reinforce here that absolutely, I think those are all things that we've heard from programs who've implemented residencies, and really reinforces that partnership component between the EPP and the LEA and some of those shared decision makings around what are the best fit types of campuses where we place teacher residents. So, Melissa, Beth, any other things to reinforce for the group?
No, I think that's great. And I think these are all such important points that I know we've been grappling with. So I appreciate y'all.
Well, again, this I think is another example of an opportunity for us to collaboratively lean in around the sort of shape and form of this teacher residency pathway as we move forward. Again, just reinforcing that we will be discussing this at the February SBEC meeting, giving the SBEC some of these parameters to provide some initial feedback on, and then do anticipate a full series of cadence of stakeholder engagement to ensure that we've got a pathway that meets the needs, that's informed by lessons learned from Texas programs, and move from there, again, dependent upon the direction and feedback of the board. Alrighty. Well, with that, I wanted to pivot to a discussion related to the effective preparation framework, and give a status update on where that work is to date, and places where we're hoping to continue to lean in collaboratively with this group as we move forward in that development. So first and foremost, wanted to first thank you all for working to help get the word out around our effective preparation framework statewide survey. We ended up having 167 respondents that were representative of 72 of our prep programs. So a solid showing from our preparation programs across all program types. And again, as a reminder of what that survey was asking, what we did was we put all of the current draft content of the effective preparation framework that you all have had such a hand in developing out to the field. And we asked for each one of the current draft levers, essential actions and key practices. We asked questions around the extent to which that given key practice aligned with the vision for what programs in Texas should be striving to implement. And then for each lever, we left open-ended response space for folks to provide additional feedback or clarification, etc. And I will apologies that I didn't provide my hyperlink here, but I will send out in a follow-up to the group the summary handout of the survey findings so that you all have that and can kind of review that in more depth. Again, knowing that we'll be looking to continue to lean in around leveraging some of that survey data to inform continued development of the framework. But so I will send that as a follow-up. But a few high-level key takeaways. Overall, we had really positive responses. So no key practices received lower than 53% agree or strongly agree. And I would say areas where there was strongest alignment were related to curriculum and progress management and candidate development. I will say, and I walked the board, if you had a chance to view the December meeting, I did walk the board through some of this in more depth. And again, it will be evident in the summary handout. But where we did see a trend in lower ratings were related to EPPs being responsive to LEA needs or priorities. So when there was a key practice that specifically named, for example, EPPs informing their recruitment strategies in relation to LEA hiring needs. Those were areas that were, in comparison to other key practices, lower rated. And we did see in some of the open-ended response some questions around potential feasibility or shared accountability over some of these components that signaled that there was this LEA partnership component. After that survey closed, we did have an opportunity to meet with the EPSG working group and did some initial language refinements based upon open-ended responses and a deeper look at the survey feedback. But ultimately, what we raised in the EPSG working group before the December meeting and then had a chance to raise for the board in their December meeting was this broader question that that was raised, I think, in the trends in the data from the survey, as well as discussion and questions that we've received from stakeholders as we've discussed about the EPF more broadly with the field, is this question around alignments with other state frameworks. We've heard feedback from stakeholders around this importance of building a common language between EPPs and LEAs. And again, that is one of the stated goals of the EPF development. We've also heard from EPPs that where they see LEA actions within the EPF, there have been questions around, are there frameworks that signal on the LEA side that there's actions that they need to take around EPP partnership as well? Where are there mutually reinforcing signals? And then really kind of a need for clearer messaging around, again, the role of LEAs within EPP practices. And so in that spirit of building a common language and thinking about alignment, we had a chance to raise some questions around opportunities to think about potentially stronger connections between the effective schools framework, the effective district framework, and the effective preparation framework. A little bit of background context: the effective schools framework has been in the field since 2019. And has really built a shared definition or a common aspirational bar for best practices across our Texas schools, and is a kind of an anchor framework that many of our districts and campuses across the state use in their continuous improvement journeys. And then TEA is also in the process currently of developing what's being called an effective district framework. Again, this is draft, still in development, but really trying to capture those common aspirational vision for district best practice. And as we've talked with stakeholders, again, I'm thinking about that, the LEA and EPP partnership components, thinking about opportunities to potentially better align some of the language across the frameworks. So I would say that currently what we see is the effective schools framework and the draft levers of the effective district framework have some conceptual alignment. So thinking about these concepts of leadership and planning, staffing and talent practices, culture and the culture of readiness within a district, materials and curriculum, and then effective instructional practice are kind of common threads that anchor the discussion around school-based best practice and the discussion around effective district practice. I would make the argument that conceptually, all those concepts live within our current draft of the effective preparation framework, but don't necessarily have that in the current way that we've bucketed the content within the EPF. There's not that same linear alignment, right? So we've been thinking about recruitment and admission, curriculum, training and support, progress management, and P12 partnership. And so wondering had been, is there potential opportunities, again, not to completely throw away the EPF content, because this is solid content that has had strong feedback from the field, but think about, might there be light touch ways to reorganize the content of the framework without getting rid of the content, but to reorganize it so it signaled more conceptual alignment with the practices in schools and districts. And so here we had a chance to do some early discussion with the EPSG EPF working group on this topic in November, and then shared some of this with the board for initial thinking as well. But the potential thought would be, so in the purple category, we have the current levers of the effective preparation framework in our draft framework. In the blue, we have some, again, just first at bat thoughts around potential new lever language that would allow us to potentially just reorganize the content of the framework to more conceptually align. Again, here I just have the district framework as an example around these same type of buckets. So again, thinking about concepts of EPP leadership and planning, which we know is crucial and critical and would align with this concept of leadership that we see in the district framework. Talent recruitment and management, again, critical components of quality prep programs, which would connect to this concept of talent. P12 partnership, really connected to this concept of culture, readiness, partnership parameters. Some of these are pretty obvious. So curriculum connecting to curriculum, and then instruction and support, potentially connecting to this concept of instruction within the district and schools frameworks. And so when again, as we took some initial at-bats to think about what would it look like to potentially not change the content of our current draft EPF, which again, I know we're still in the process of refining, but to potentially reorganize it across levers, we thought recruitment and admissions could fall under this concept of talent recruitment and management. This curriculum would live as curriculum. Training and support, again, that's about those coaching practices and ongoing supports. With a live in the world of instruction and support, it's essentially the same. Progress management and candidate development. Again, that was really thinking about monitoring those performance gates and those providing those strategic interventions for candidates who might not be keeping pace with the program, thinking about that as talent recruitment and management, and then P12 partnership as P12 partnership. So really here, the big takeaways are, so it'd be about some slight renaming of some levers, and then really here, the potential opportunity to think about ways to combine some of the core components of the recruitment and admissions and progress management and candidate development current levers. As we went through that conceptual exercise, one thing that we raised for the EPSG EPF working group was that as we were organizing, we recognized that in our current draft framework, this concept of EPP leadership and planning really wasn't as evident. I will say it's not that we haven't all thought deeply around the concept of EPP leadership and planning. I think actually where a lot of that shows up currently is in some of the components of P12 partnership. But knowing that for educator preparation programs, your opportunities, the work that you all do so well of stepping back and articulating your core mission, values, and goals, developing those strategic priorities and plans, progress monitoring your candidates' development and alignment with those goals, engaging in those continuous improvement practices, are all things that are so core to the work of the EPP itself that then informs how you engage in some of those parallel processes with P12 partners. The one question that we raised, again, with the EPF working group and then with the SBEC was, potentially, is there value in us also stepping back and thinking about developing out the content for an EPP leadership and planning lever? So really clearly putting some stakes in the ground around some components such as vision, mission guiding principles, goals and strategic planning, performance management, and continuous improvement as an opportunity to kind of further refine the content of the EPF. And so we shared that with the SBEC in their December meeting. Again, with the EPF working group, we had a good discussion around, kind of preliminarily, what would that look and sound like? Are there places where we need some additional stakeholder engagement here? A thought around, are there components of the framework that we roll out first and then roll out some of these other components later? We're all kind of parts of our initial discussion. But really where that led us to with the board is naming that we'd like to continue as part of a broader set of stakeholder engagement to continue to work with the EPSG and the EPSG EPF working group to continue to refine the EPF content, really thinking through two lenses. Really, I think there's more work to be done to continue to refine the content of the framework. We think kind of the value of this iterative development through continued stakeholder engagement, and would love to have an opportunity to step back with this group and with the working group to think more intentionally around the value and potential pathway forward for this potential reorganization of the EPF content and this potential concept of building out an EPP leadership and planning lever. So that's sort of on the docket as framing for the board and an ask for this group that we'd love to continue to engage in this collaborative feedback over the course of the next few months as we work to further refinement of the framework. And then two, I would make a plug that the concepts and the constructs within the EPF, I think, give us a really strong foundation, even in its current form, to begin to step back collaboratively and talk about, are there places in which, if the EPF serves as the aspirational North Star framework, are there places in which we need to step back and potentially give guidance to the SBEC around places within their rules where we might need to do some, what I've been calling kind of recalibration of the baseline. And so we'd love to also with this group lean into some additional stakeholder opportunities to potentially review, reorganize, or even give input to the SBEC on places to potentially rewrite their SBEC rules to align with the, again, the foundational components within the EPF content. And again, here with a particular focus on chapter 228. I will say, if you've been, if you scrolled through chapter 228 anytime recently, and if you're like me and you get to a page and you're like, I don't know which subsection I'm on or which number or letter, because I've just read a like 15-sentence paragraph. They're very, very long rules. And we've, for many a year, have had reflections on potential ways to reorganize them. Again, not necessarily change content, but to reorganize the structure of 228 and so that, frankly, it's just easier to navigate and could create kind of, for lack of a better word, a clean slate upon which we could have some of these clear discussions around opportunities for EPF alignment. And so to kind of set the stage and kind of begin the process of creating that like clean organizational slate for 228 for then to have these broader stakeholder discussions around places for EPF alignment. We will have a discussion item in February that will aim to do just that, start to talk about some of the foundational reorganization of 228 into more clear conceptual buckets so that we can have this broader discussion with the board in the future around alignment of places where we think we want to align best practice with expectations within our rules. I just talked for a long time. I'm gonna pause there and ask if there's any thoughts or preliminary thoughts or feedback on kind of the proposed plan going forward with EPF development. Again, I do intend on reaching out to the EPSG EPF working group today to share with you all a more in-depth scope and sequence of some engagement opportunities we hope to leverage with you all over the next few months. Again, we'll share our standing updates with the EPSG at large, but wanted to see if there was any additional initial thoughts or questions. All right, y'all. Well, I hope everyone's ready to roll up their sleeves and keep going on the EPF train. I want to say I cannot thank the EPSG EPF working group enough for the work that they've done to support the development of the EPF content to date. I think the feedback that we heard more broadly from the field really reinforces the thoughtful, balanced approach that group has taken through sort of the iterative development of the framework, and say how excited we are to continue to be able to work with the EPSG at large and with that working group in particular to really think about further refinement of the framework going forward. So we're getting there, y'all, when it comes to building this. And Rome wasn't built in a day, but we're really excited with the progress to date and are looking forward to kind of continuing to thought partner with you all as we move forward in development here. All right. So then turning over to our final topic for today before we open it up for any other broader questions. Did want to do an update on the SBEC's December discussion on teacher performance assessment exam options. So to set the stage, in December, the SBEC had an opportunity. I'm going to step back one meeting previous. In their September meeting, the SBEC gave TEA some clear directives and next steps to bring back options to discuss teacher performance assessments as certification exams. So at the December meeting, we had an opportunity to talk with the board based on their discussions in their work sessions and previous discussions about opportunities to implement a sort of a slate of teacher performance assessment options, inclusive of implementation of EdTPA, which has been piloted in the field for a number of years, the discussion around the development of what's being kind of loosely called a text TPA or a Texas-specific teacher performance assessment. And then thirdly, a potential process to vet what's being called alternative TPAs. Again, here, these being other products that are in the field, either developed by vendors or other programs that could potentially be reviewed by the ASPEC and approved as other TPA certification exam options. And at their December meeting, the ASPEC took action to direct staff to begin procurement processes related to both the development of a text TPA and the vetting of alternative TPA options. And again, we are using the word procurement here in sort of its most formal term, but this being sort of an early discussion around beginning processes to talk about what the development of a text TPA or alternative TPAs would look and sound like, with many opportunities to circle back and seek input from and guidance from the board. In our discussion specifically related to certification exams, again, in December, the board framing that they wanted to see options for pedagogy certification exams for both teacher performance assessments, and then also thinking about what we were calling, for lack of a better word, carve-outs, or are there some folks where we would recommend a different path? And so specifically as it relates to pedagogy certification exams, the proposed set of strategies that were discussed with the board in December included 5 different ways that a candidate could take a pedagogy certification exam for standard teacher certification. And that included, again, that EdTPA, text TPA, or an approved alternate TPA. And then there was a discussion based upon feedback from stakeholders and discussions that were had at the SBOE around potentially a different pathway for teacher candidates who are seeking certification in CTE fields or seeking certification in fine arts fields. And so discussions were around the potential to have candidates seeking certification in CTE fields take a trade and industrial education PPR exam rather than completing a performance assessment. And then we had early discussions with the SPEC around this concept of potentially separating out those fine arts fields for a separate PPR exam versus them being required to take a performance assessment. We did have a fair amount of, we did have multiple speakers from the music community in particular name that they were not in support of that carve out. And so that is also something we'll take into consideration and discussions with the board in their February meeting. What we discussed in December was also the considerations around potential timelines here. So really reinforcing kind of the potential pathway to implementation across these types of carve-outs. So you will see that for the TPA specific options, the current rule text that the board has been discussing and will continue to discuss in December and April would include having EdTPA be a requirement in the 24-25 academic year, with these potential of the alternative TPAs and text TPAs for those coming on board in 26-27. There was a discussion around a preliminary timeline if we were to develop a alternative pathway for fine arts fields, that would require new standards development and new certification exam development, which would likely launch in 28-29. And that given that we have an already operational PPR for trained industrial education, that could be operational as early as 24-25. Again, we did hear feedback from a number of stakeholders in December around some concerns around these timelines, and so those will continue to be timelines that will be discussed with the board at their February meeting. I'll pause there to see if there's any additional clarifying questions. Again, we'll continue to have discussions with the board on these topics in their at their next meeting in the context of Chapter 230 A and C. Alrighty, well then I'll stop talking and I will turn it back over to Christy.
Thanks so much, Jess. And I'm sure you want to go and drink a Diet Coke or water or something to kind of give your voice a little bit of a break. I did fail to mention early on, so many apologies, that Emily Garcia, Associate Commissioner, was unable to be here today. She sends her regrets. She is attending a funeral. She did want to let y'all know how much she appreciates you, as well as supports the staff and all of this work, and looks forward to a very exciting February meeting. Just want to give you a highlight of the 2023 meeting dates for EPSG, and I will also send these out so you don't have to have it memorized. What we're going to be looking at is ordering the EPSG meetings 3 weeks after the SBEC meeting. What we tried in 2022 is having it 2 weeks. It really just does not give staff enough time to really reflect and get the input from the board and then turn around and translate that into something that is very beneficial and useful for this group. And so this is what we're looking at. Again, I will send this to you, and I will move heaven and earth to not have to change these unless there are some unforeseen circumstances. So that is all I have. I would have never dreamt that we would have had 13 minutes back, but again, happy Friday. Staff will go ahead and just stay on until 12 o'clock. If there's any other questions that anyone has, like I said, we will go ahead and stay on just to make sure that everyone has all their questions answered.
Thank you all. We really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend and really appreciate everything you do.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
I have a question. It's not urgent, but I'm curious. I'm a fine arts educator. I teach visual arts, and I was curious, what was the response from the music educators about the preparation program? I want to know about their logic. I guess because fine arts is so much as portfolio based as it is, it's cumulative work that we do. I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yes, certainly. So I can give kind of a high level, Christina, and I can also point you to some places in some of the public testimony. I think it's always helpful to kind of hear from the folks themselves and some of what they shared. But there were some concerns around the ability to implement it within the structure of the program in and of itself, and some of the parameters around a performance assessment, and really, the nature of fine arts preparation, particularly music, and potential, potential challenges that they raised around the ability to implement it in that setting. So I think I can certainly also again point you to places where folks have given their testimony and kind of shared their perspective. But that's what we did hear from some stakeholders. I would say that what we did hear at this past meeting was that the folks from music organizations did testify that they were in opposition to the music fields having a carve out, so that music fields being held accountable for something different than all educators, but named that they weren't in support of move towards implementation of a performance assessment.
I think that's so fascinating, since there is a huge performance assessment for students in general through TMEA. I mean, that's one of the ways that music educators are evaluated, is how their students do at these different competitions throughout the year. So I'll have to dive into that, because even in visual arts, I think that pre-service teachers' capacity to be able to develop a portfolio that shows their understanding of like rigor and pedagogy, because it's an EC through 12 certificate. We don't see that right now with the current test. They work to take the PPR and the content exam, but that doesn't mean that they're ready for the classroom, because they might be good at one facet of visual arts, for example, but they don't know how to implement anything else. That's one of the limitations of our art education programs right now. So I think that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. No, I really appreciate you asking that question. Absolutely.
All right, if there's nothing else, we will give you back 10 minutes and call it Happy Friday, y'all. If you need anything, you know where to find us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.